Good morning. Fran Gary, excited to be here. I'm going to take you on a journey, and that journey is the story of me. It's the story of my early learning and my early development. As part of that story and as part of that journey, we're going to use these childhood indicators as sort of mile markers that mark very important impacts at different times of my life that impacted access and when layered on each other truly impacted my life. I'm going to talk about access because access to healthcare, food, to not being beaten, to exposure to violence, to homelessness, to having a place to live, to being able to go to school, set a foundation for me that allowed me to not only learn to read, but read to learn. But for me, in this journey you're going to hear, reading helped me survive. Let's start where everything starts, which is at my birth. I was born December the 10th, 1963, on a street corner. That's a true statement. Riverside, California. My mother had another, my brother, he was one. She was going down the street corner. My father was off, he was in the Air Force. She dropped down, her water broke. I started to crest, and a police officer came around the corner. And that's how I entered this world. I should have known then that it was going to be an interesting life. Within the year of 1964, there's also some incredible symbols. 23% of the children lived in poverty. 10 million children were hungry. That didn't apply to me, though. I lived in a home where my father was in the Air Force. I wouldn't say we were wealthy, but what I would say is we were comfortable. I had access to health care. My father had military benefits. Also, at the same time, when my father left the service, we had health care through Medicaid. My mother, she was active in the home. My mother also participated in our school activities. She helped in the library. She helped in the class with reading. She was like an assistant teacher. As I entered into those 10 years and into my third grade years, I was a voracious reader. I was on reading teams. I was a regional chess champion. I was second seat in the state orchestra for viola. I'd say I was pretty well thriving, right? I learned to read, and I also learned that reading would teach me how to learn. But sometimes things turn dark. And one day as a fourth grader, 1974, I came home. And when I came home, there was police tape all around our house. My mother was standing outside. There was a series of sheriffs. People were taking stuff out of the house. I rode my bike up. They took my bike, and they told me, you can walk in the house and get 2 bags, and you can never return. I got 1 bag full of clothes, and I got 1 bag with 4 books. And that was the beginning of childhood poverty for me. Because you see, what I didn't know is that my father was a large drug dealer. What I didn't know was that my father was in a lot of illegal things. What I also didn't know was that my father had just been convicted to 25 years to prison, with 20 of those years suspended, and he would have to serve somewhere around 2 of those years. And neither did my mother. Immediately, we were homeless. My mother had no skills. She had worked in the home, and she had 2 children, and she had to figure out what to do. She begged and borrowed from friends. For a while, we could continue to go to school, but about 3 months in, we stopped going to school. We didn't have money to eat, and believe it or not, I was the thinnest of all my families. So I could go sideways into the garbage can at the Safeways, where the people knew us so well for the next year they would stack up the food. That's why I don't like cherry pies or Spam now. And that's how we'd eat. No school. I was homeless. I was hungry. The one thing I wasn't experiencing at that time was any sense of violence. My father got out of prison. My parents reunited. My father was changed. He was angry. And he was angry at us, and he was angry at my mother. And he made a decision that we would all pile in to a Delta 88 with the bags we had, a dog, and we would travel the United States. No money, no food, take a job everywhere we can. And for the next 5 years, I remained out of school. For the next 5 years, my father became abusive. My father would beat my mother 2-3 times a week, sometimes to the point where she couldn't see. She couldn't take care of us. When that wasn't enough, my father decided he would turn and he would beat my brother with a bat. And if that wasn't enough in the next 5 years, my father decided that consistently, weekly, for the next 3 years, he would sexually assault me. Those were not good times, as you could imagine. And still, sometimes we would be in hotel rooms, and my father would have us go in other ones where people left the door open to see if they may have left some food so that we could eat. All those indicators now applied to me. Do you remember when I told you I had to leave the house and I took 2 bags? One of those bags was clothes. The other of those bags had 4 books in them. The first book was, Hey God, It's Me, Margaret, by Judy Blume. The second book was Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. The third book was Aesop's Fables. And the fourth book was a dictionary. When my father would beat my mother, and my mother knew that beating was coming, she would lock us up in a bathroom, tell us to run, and I'd always take a book. And the book I would read would be God, It's Me, Margaret. When my father would sexually abuse me, beat my brother, I would find a bathtub. I don't know why I like bathtubs, but it was safe. And I would read Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. And when there were times we didn't have food and things were hard, somehow Aesop's Fables and being able to be somewhere else would get me through. Reading for me was not a function to learn, but it was a function to survive. Within 1979, we had been in and out of care, other people's care. In 1979, my brother was convicted of a very large felony at the age of 14. He was tried as an adult, and he was put in prison for 5 years. I was left alone with my mother and father. I was removed from their custody. It was the first time I felt that I was safe for a period of 3 months when they had decided they were going to put me back in his custody. The fear you can imagine of being raped again. The fear of watching your mother being beaten was very difficult. But where I was at the time, I'd gotten a book. And that book is I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. And I read that book, and let me tell you, I was never sexually abused again. And in fact, I had the courage to tell my mother what had gone on. And when I was reunited with my mother was in the process of divorcing my father. My mother was in the process of healing herself, but we were still in poverty. And we lived in an extended stay motel. You call them extended stays, it was a motel. Men brought women there hourly. And the only way we could stay there was because my mother and I on the weekends agreed to clean all the rooms for $100 a week. And things that would happen at night, you would not want a child there. So my mother made sure, because I was going to school now, that when I left school, I walked to the library. The library closed at 8, and my mother didn't get done till 9. And the librarians would let me stay in there. And they taught me the Dewey Decimal System. They taught me the wonders of Agatha Christie and Sir Conan Doyle. In 2015, 50 years later, 22% of children are in poverty. 1.3 million children are homeless. 7% of our children have no health care. 60% are exposed to violence, and 48 million children are food insecure or hungry. Children are still fighting to survive. Is there hope? I have hope. I have hope because I met a young man at a Books a Million, it's a store. And I love bookstores. You can imagine now that bookstores are security for me. I could be in them for hours. And I saw this young man sitting down by the Harry Potter, and he'd been there for about an hour, hour and a half, and nobody came around him. And he was reading one of the Harry Potter books, and I went up to him and I said, "Do you like Harry Potter?" He said, "Yes, I do." I said, "Why don't you get the book and take it home and read it?" He said, "I can't afford it." He said, "My mom and dad can't afford it." He said, "I come here after school. I do my homework. I come here after school so that I can read all the Harry Potter books. And then my mother picks me up when the store closes." And the clerk was there, and she nodded that that was true. And I went to the counter, and I bought every Harry Potter book there was. And I handed him those Harry Potter books. And I said, you read these. You go to the library, you read these. And maybe one day you'll write a book. And he said, "Maybe I will." I have hope. So what I leave you with is that access matters. I know it firsthand. Let's make sure, collectively in this room, with this leadership, that all children have a strong foundation, not only to survive, like we did 50 years ago and children do today, but that they have the ability to thrive. Thank you.